Welcome back to the fourth and last part of the lecture on illustration. When we last left off, I was talking about um, the importance of scientific and diagrammatic illustrations. And there are a number of different kinds of scientific and diagrammatic illustrations. Some like the kind of illustrations that you would get when you buy a toy for a child for Christmas, and it gives you the how-to instructions of how to put it together, or like a Lego set, diagrammatic illustrations. Interestingly enough, you'll notice that a lot of those diagrammatic illustrations involve isometric drawing. Um, but also scientific illustration can be for astronomical observatories. There are all kinds. I'm just going to concentrate on a few. One is on medical illustration. Here's an albinous print. I should have put some info on the side of it. And the main point I want to make about medical illustration is, once again, that the advantage of a medical illustrator has over a photographer is that they can create clarity and understanding in their image, whether the image is painted or drawn or digital or some combination of those. The illustrator, because they create the image with their mind, thinking it through, rather than purely just by observing light and dark, they can create clarity and understanding in the image and make sure that the image is clear to the viewer. And you can imagine you could bring a camera into a surgery, and just from the sheer difficulty of the blood and changes of all the glistening surfaces, it would be really hard for those photographs to be clear. But a gifted illustrator like John Forster here can do a fantastic job of making everything clearly understood, such as this kind of medical, like a surgery description type illustration. And here we have two other examples, a Randall Mackenzie illustration, and Felix Donelson was prize winner from the 2018 Medical Illustration Society. And another type of illustration, a type of technical or diagrammatic or scientific illustration that we've seen already was archaeological illustration. We've seen this reconstruction archaeological drawing. And in archaeological illustrations, you have two main types. You have kind of reconstruction illustrations, as well as direct observational illustrations, where the point of the illustration is to record exactly everything on, let's say, this particular flint tool, basically a hand axe. And once again, you can see that the techniques of the illustrator, and in this case, archaeological illustrations for these type of objects are very, very specific. They have a very specific type of technique, and they are designed to make everything clear, especially all the changes of surface, whereas a photograph would only give a very small portion of that same information. Another type of technical type of illustration is like product illustration, product design illustration, where a product illustration can be used for all kinds of purposes. But a major part of it is in terms of selling the idea of the product to potential investors or to a company. And so here we have an example of a toy product illustration, and here's a classic fashion illustration by René Gouraud. And I wanted to end this lecture talking a little bit about the influence of, like I said, illustration leads to this broader topic of commercial art. And today's art world is dominated by commercial arts, including animation and game design, and we probably won't have time to do a separate lecture entirely on those fields. But it's through the kind of silver age of sequential art that we see kind of a connection between those early illustrators of the golden age all the way up to the people who do movies today, who do storyboarding and animation, and as well as who do sequential art, comic books today, and the people who do concept art. It all of it kind of stems from these core individuals. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of these guys. So on this first page, and technically, like these guys, Will Eisner, you could almost say that he's part of the golden age of comic books, but I wanted to include them in this longer period. So here's the Silver Age, and so Will Eisner and Bern Hogarth. This piece right here, this Roy Krenkel, is actually Roy Krenkel and Al Williamson, who we'll be talking about in a little bit as well. Right here. And here's Al Williamson, and here's some other pages that he did entirely on his own, like Flash Gordon pieces. And Harvey Kurtzman, right here. Later on, Harvey Kurtzman concentrated primarily on humorous comics, primarily for Mad Magazine. And here are two others. And I wish I had more time. I have a folder with a lot more research on the later years, in the 60s and into the 70s, and even into the early 80s in comic books and in early animation. But for now, we just need to end here. So Joe Orlando, who's right here, these two pages. This is a drawing by Wally Wood of the two of them working together. And here's a little self-portrait Wally Wood did of himself. And Wally Wood is famous not only as a great comic book illustrator, great comic book artist, but also as the inventor of the 22 panels that always works. Photocopies of this still exist in the publishing houses of DC Comics and Marvel. Is still passed between comic book artists, and the basic idea is, when all else fails, think of these ways of making, boring headshot artwork less boring. Comic book artists are always complaining about writers giving them tons and tons of panels where it's just two people talking to each other. And so what Wally Wood is doing is saying you don't have to make those things necessarily look boring. And I think that may be the last page. Okay, that's the end.